Hey there everyone, this is ZNote of ZNoteTaku. As promised in the video last week, I'll be presenting my Q&A video to celebrate the 1-year anniversary of the channel. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions, and I hope that the answers are what you were looking for. Catmoon asks, what are some anime you would recommend to first-time watchers? I find that the best way to recommend anime to people is less about having a set list at the ready, and more asking them what are the kinds of things in entertainment that they like. If my own experience of talking about anime with people has been my teacher, it's that personalizing your recommendations is a far more effective solution. I've gotten friends to watch Vampire Hunter D Bloodlust since they love vampire myth, Makia When the Promised Flower Blooms because they love stories about families, and Handshakers because they wanted a premise that sounded completely stupid. It helps to know your audience, but while I'm at it, don't watch that last one. Mikuru, looking a lot less moe than I remember from Haruhi, asks, will you review more hanimes? I plan on doing either a hentai or controversial anime for Valentine's Days moving forward. I did it this year with A Kiss for the Petals Joined in Love with You more as a joke, but as a result, I've gotten a number of requests to do more of that. I don't intend for this to become a hentai channel, but I will likely do more, yes. Jessica Ellen asks, what's your main criteria to say you truly enjoyed an anime? Unlike some other reviewers online, I don't really categorize the various aspects of a story like visuals, sound, characters, story, etc. because they're all too interconnected as elements to neatly parse them out. Especially given the variety of stories and storytelling styles that exist, sometimes more emphasis is placed on certain elements more so than others. But if I had to come up with some kind of universal rule that defines when I've truly enjoyed something, I'd say it's when it's an anime that, for one reason or another, refuses to leave me alone, either because it won me over by pure entertainment value, or because its thematic content was such that I find myself constantly engaging with it long after the fact. One of my old English teachers from high school had a phrase they liked using. If you're still thinking about a book a week after finishing, it must be doing something right. Given you can still be thinking about something because you hated it, but that's a different kind of reaction. Lavamoo asks, what is one thing you would have wanted to tell your younger self? Learn to wait. Are you a cat person or a dog person? I like both, but I have a slight preference for dogs, which is funny considering I was afraid of dogs for a long time after one bit my hand pretty badly when I was 4 years old. I ultimately managed to get beyond that fear when I dog sat for my voice studio professor in undergrad for a day. She was adorable and nestled right into my lap while I studied my music. Plans for the channel? I hope to make more content that's thematic in nature rather than simply reviewing. The Scum's Wish and Liz and the Bluebird videos were the first steps in trying to do that, and both of them were definitely fun to make, though getting the timing of the latter was more headache-inducing than I'd like to admit since I did it all in one continuous take. I would also like to do more content focusing on specific figures in the industry, both current and older. Anime's history is long, intricate, and surprisingly complex, so being able to delve into who the people are that are responsible for making the content we love is an idea that excites me. Sweatkage asks, if you could live in any anime world, which one would it be? This is going to sound like a very odd answer, but Yokohama Shopping Log. Granted, the apocalyptic backdrop isn't exactly the most inviting thought in the world, but the idea of a quiet life and people understanding that there are still beautiful things to see, hear, feel, and experience is something I find so pleasant, life-affirming, and relaxing. I'd want to live in an environment with people like that, even if it were indeed the end of the world. What's your favorite film that isn't an anime? That's actually quite dependent on my mood. If I want something that I love for pure entertainment, I find Fargo by Joel and Ethan Coen in 1996 to be pretty difficult to top. For something sentimental and sweet, I'm quite partial to Once from the 2000s. For something tragic and painful, How to Die in Oregon is a brutal documentary. But if you really forced me to pick something, it's a genuine toss-up between Citizen Kane, which was the first time I really began to see movies as more than just entertainment, The Godfather, which I make a point of watching several times a year, and My Dinner with Andre. That last one especially is a film I find so unique and interesting, pretty much absent of any cliché you could imagine. I actually do have a Letterboxd account, so I'll link that in the video's description in case that's something you want to peruse. I don't know if you already know, but I'm Igor. Oh damn, that's you? Good to hear from you. I hope that life's been treating you kindly. David Metacarpa asks, what other hobbies do you have outside of anime? Aside from music history studies, I love taking walks, recreational reading, which I should really get back into doing, and theater. I'm taking part in my local production of Stephen Sondheim's Into the Woods as the baker, and being able to hop on a musical theater stage again was something that I missed far more than I thought I did. It has definitely impacted my mood in a good way. I also have a love for trivia, and sometimes partake in trivia evenings at restaurants and bars with my friends. That started out pretty young when I was watching a lot of game shows on television, constantly trying to guess what the answers to the questions were. Dominic Genazzo asks, how many subs for you to open an OnlyFans? Come on, Dominic, we all know that when an AniTuber makes an OnlyFans, it's called an OnlyFans. As for the question itself, 696,969. But in all seriousness, I highly doubt I'd ever get an OnlyFans. I'd be more inclined to start a Patreon instead, if there was any fan interest in that. Nomadix asks, favorite bands and artists? I actually don't really follow any. I tend to like music more on a piece-by-piece or album-by-album basis rather than choosing specific artists or bands. I can't call Pink Floyd a favorite, but I've listened to The Wall a number of times. I can't call Bob Dylan a favorite, but I've listened to Highway 61 Revisited a bunch. I suppose I would have to choose the Beatles since I took a class on them in undergrad where we listened to pretty much everything they ever recorded, including studio practice sessions. As far as popular music as a whole, since my graduate school and PhD work mostly pertains to classical music, I am, I confess, woefully underprepared to talk about the latest trends in more popular genres. Besides, if I want to learn anything about electronic music, you're the person I'm going to for that. Emma asks, do you love us?
Hi, my parole officer says I have to show you a copy of my criminal record before we're allowed to go out.
Corner Twist asks, why do you rarely drop shows even when you're not enjoying them? Sorry if this comes off as rude. Oh, it doesn't. No need to worry about that. I very rarely drop shows since I think it's interesting to see the ways in which something doesn't work. Even if I find a show terrible for the same general reason as I do for another one, the particular specifics are almost always different since they're different stories. Plus, I find that in order to really understand why something doesn't work, that includes fully seeing it through. Thinking about media, even media that I dislike, is a fun exercise for me. Also, experiencing media you dislike is important not only in the vague sense of better appreciating the media you do like, or because your opinion can change as you watch, but also for exploring your own aesthetic sensibility. Media is a form of self-exploration, so why cut a show's journey off before it's over? When I teach my college students, one of the main topics we spend a fair amount of time talking about is why certain music repulses us either ethically or artistically, and they've found over the 15 weeks of the semester that their tastes are more nuanced and thorough than they themselves realized. It's all there lying under the surface, and sometimes it's seeing media you don't like that manages to draw that knowledge out. Just don't ask me about the Scarlet Nexus anime. Do you ever plan to watch Shouwa, Genroku, Raguko, Shinjuu? I do, yes. It's just a question of when since my backlog is so large, but it is on there, I promise. I completely forgot to congratulate you. Hope your channel grows more. Thank you very much. I hope I can keep up the good work. Creative username 39 asks, favorite non-anime TV show and film? I already answered the film part, but for television, I really liked WandaVision, game shows which I mentioned before, and Seinfeld. What would you say is your favorite decade when it comes to anime? That's a good question. Every decade has its highs and lows to be sure, and since there's still plenty of anime I've yet to see, any answer I give, or quite frankly, anybody gives, should come with an asterisk. Not to mention that artistic periods don't neatly fall into decades anyway. I'm actually going to cheat this answer a little bit and say, at the time I'm writing this, the period from about 1995 to 2005 was a pretty remarkable decade. We had a slew of highly experimental shows that pushed the medium, the emergence of Kyoto animation, a high period for Madhouse, and some real classics like Kino's Journey. This answer, of course, does not discount the phenomenal anime or the crappy anime that came before, during, or after that time period, because there's a lot of that. It's just a question of which crap are you willing to overlook. But if I absolutely had to pick a decade that starts and stops in the way we usually associate with the term, I'd say the 2000s. What are some of your biggest guilty pleasures, anime or otherwise? I'm actually not fond of the term guilty pleasure, since liking something really shouldn't make you feel guilty, but I understand the implication. I do have a list on my AniList profile called "Okay, Just Hear Me Out," specifically for opinions that could be thought of as in the minority, weird, or because my perspective differs from what could be called the general consensus. But if I had to pick a couple from there, well, I liked In Another World with My Smartphone, even though I know it's a terrible isekai. Mayoiga is a show I find unironically good, and that Gundam vs. Hello Kitty was the crossover I didn't know that I needed. As far as non-anime guilty pleasures, the movie Fired Up certainly comes to mind, and I will absolutely put on The Maury Show if there's nothing else on television. It's so hypnotizingly bad.
You are not.
Oh my God!
What would you say were some of the major factors when it came to shaping your taste in media? Aside from simply seeing a wide variety of things, helped by getting a Netflix account in high school, the biggest factor I'd say was simply talking about it with people, and more specifically, asking and being asked why. That one question breaks the wall of just take my word for it and forces people to explain why they felt the way they did. Taking part in discussions like these not only shows you the numerous ways that people can react to the same thing you yourself saw, but also to better understand your own reaction either in contrast to or similarly to them. Think of it this way: discussion breeds perspective, and perspective shapes taste. The other major factor, connecting to before, was writing reviews. I wrote my first review back in junior year of high school when I tried explaining why I didn't love the To Kill a Mockingbird film. I like the film a lot, but I don't love it the same way that other people seemed to. That spawned a drive to just write about movies, one of which was accepted into my high school's newspaper. What I wasn't aware of at the time was that writing reviews can be thought of as a conversation with yourself. While it's true that they're distributed for a larger general audience, you're also ultimately trying to convince yourself that the opinion you're putting on the page is compelling enough to hold its own. I found myself asking that why question in my own writing, which required me to get more specific and beyond the vague. Whether it's dialogue with others or dialogue with yourself, discussion is perhaps the biggest shaper of my taste. I still love talking about media now. If I didn't, what the hell am I doing here? Congrats once again, and I do hope the subscriber count keeps growing. Thank you for watching, and for your kind words. Yeetus asks, what's your favorite JRPG? Final Fantasy IX, though Nier Automata is a very close second. Aaron Rodriguez asks, congratulations, you're now at the head of a production committee, but a difficult task lies ahead. You have to turn your least favorite You have to turn your least favorite YA novel into an anime. Which novel is it? Which studio and core staff will you pick? Director, series composition, character designer, art director, and as many roles as you want to add. Aaron, god fucking damn it. I can see the shit-eating grin on your face as you were typing this. I hope you know that. Okay, I should disclose that I haven't read, as it was being published, young adult literature in about 8 years, so I'm mostly going by the stuff that I read back in undergrad and whatnot. The book I'd adapt is 13 Reasons Why, by Jay Asher, which is a book that, while I do admire aspects of it, I have soured on more and more over the years for various reasons. But as for the production itself, there's one thing I'd insist. I'd make it a movie or duology as opposed to a TV series. Since the story is meant to take place over the course of about 24 hours, making a longer film best captures that feeling of spending a long time with Clay and Hannah. It also gives plenty of time for us to grow accustomed to whoever would play Hannah's voice actress, for whom I'd pick Hayashibara Megumi or Chihara Minori. To direct and storyboard, I'd want Furukawa Tomohiro. While their first efforts were the highly theatrical review Starlight, their experience working with Kunihiko Ikuhara I think would give them a solid foundation to handle more down-to-earth, dramaturgically intense character study. Besides, there's an inherent theatricality to the idea of having Hannah's suicide notes be presented as audio tapes. Additionally, I feel they'd handle the flashbacks with an appropriate amount of surrealism or suggestion and innuendo rather than going for purely visceral visual impact, and their taste for music styling would be crucial in selling a lot of these moments. Extending off of that, sound director would be Yota Tsuruoka, since his output demonstrates a strong ear both for the loud and deathly quiet, plus a good use of diegetic noises. Kamata Chikago would be color designer because of their ability to portray the bleak, and art directing would be Shimizu Tomoyuki for their ability to portray the empty or the barren. For series composition, I'd pick Okada Mari because of her incredible ability to express sensitivity and emotionality, and character designers would go to Yoshitoshi Abe or Oiwa Kenji for simplistic designs that can get highly expressive or horrifying if needs be. I wouldn't go for something more highly detailed, since I think it would draw too much attention to visually gratifying beauty as opposed to the existential misery that the story attempts to convey. Plus, I've found that no one can quite show visual deadness or the fading light in one's eyes like they can. As for studio, this is the only one I'm kind of stuck on, but I'd say give it to Brainspace. Or hell, give it to White Fox. They need something to work on that's not Steins Gate or ReZero. What's the biggest or most sudden change of heart you've had about a work in the middle of watching, reading, or playing it? This is going to sound very ironic given what I said about YA fiction before delving into the previous question, but The Catcher in the Rye. When I first read the book about 2 years ago, I found Holden Caulfield to be such an insufferable character that I seriously considered stopping. As I read further, though, I found myself sympathizing with his inner tumult and not being able to find someone with which he could properly connect, caught on the cusp of adulthood's anxious whirlwind and sorrow. He is lost and not composed at all except for his writing and relationship with his younger sister. Watching him desperately try and hold on to something meaningful seemed to so wonderfully capture late teenage life's many metaphorical hurdles. The final sequence of Phoebe riding the carousel is one of my favorite passages in all American literature. In terms of visual tricks, what are your pet peeves or favorites? I love repeated animation cycles, both because they can be highly cost-effective and thematically or tonally relevant. The opening sequences for Serial Experiments Lane episodes before the title cards, and the train sign for Mawaru Penguin Drum being two prominent examples. Even in things like Ash preparing to throw a Pokeball in Pokemon, Sakura using the Clow in Cardcaptor Sakura, or the Digivolving sequence in Digimon never failed to get me jazzed up as a kid, or even now. Visual trick pet peeves would be characters going ballistic over how delicious food is. I can only handle so many characters getting high-pitched squeals while pressing their hand to their cheek saying oishii. Unless it's something particularly over the top like in Let's Go Eat Some Italian Food from the Diamond is Unbreakable episode of JoJo, characters eating or drinking isn't that exciting. Choose a single, unnecessarily difficult theory person you think anime fans should read. Michel Foucault. If you know, you know. Tabla asks, a lot, so let's go through these all one at a time. How did you first get into anime? That's a long topic that warrants its own video one day, so I apologize for not answering it here. Are you single?
Hi, my parole officer says I have to show you a copy of my criminal record before we're allowed to go out.
Biggest pet peeve? I'm going to assume that you don't mean anime pet peeves, since Aaron just sort of asked about that, so I'll give you a few. One, at least as far as my day-to-day life is concerned, is lateness. When I say or something else mentions a particular time, I expect it to be at that particular time. I don't mind a few minutes of dilly-dallying or being properly informed that something is running behind, but when it pushes beyond 5 minutes, I get very antsy. My parents were adamant that one of the most gracious things a person can do is be on time, if not just a bit early, and that has actually helped me in more situations than I'd expected. The others are reviews that are unnecessarily antagonistic or try to overtly pass themselves off as objective fact. This ties into something else. I've actually floated the idea of making a 14 things your review should never do video, since I find myself so frequently disappointed by user-submitted criticism on database websites like AniList. I haven't done so yet since that's the kind of content that can get mean-spirited very quickly, but I suppose if there is a demand for it, I'll make it and be as kind as I can be. Have you ever considered getting anime merch? Do you have any anime merch? I do, yes. I own all the Haruhi Suzumiya light novels, a Sylveon plushie that I got from the Pokemon store in New York City, and a Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood poster next to my exercise bike. If I had a more disposable income, perhaps I would invest more time and money into anime merchandise, but alas, that is not how I am at the present. Favorite anime OP, ED, insert, or soundtrack? I'll drop a playlist in the video's description since I honestly can't pick just one OP or ED, but as far as shows overall, Bakano probably has my favorite soundtrack, along with the Hibike Euphonium franchise and Sarazanmai. If you have one, what's the most hyped series that ended up leading to the most disappointment for you? This is a very obvious answer, but I have to be honest when I say The Promised Neverland Season 2. I haven't read the original manga, but it was clear from watching the season that its handling of the material was a discombobulated mess. I don't know whether that was the result of the publisher Shueisha, Cloverworks executives, or something else entirely, but after how much I adored the first season's sense of atmosphere, foreboding, and escalation, that second season was a misery. Opposite to the previous question, is there a series that initially flew under the radar that seemed horrible to you and ended up being amazing later? Mayoiga definitely comes to mind. When you see a show with a 50% average rating, you naturally go in with skepticism that it could be good. But thanks to Aaron's persuasion, I gave it a whirl and found myself liking it a lot. It served as a good reminder that average scores and whatnot are not necessarily the best barometer for determining whether you'll like something. I do plan on making a video on Mayoiga with Aaron at some point, and I know there's one person on AniList who has been very patient in waiting for that to come out. I am so sorry, Oezy. I swear I didn't forget you. Girls und Panzer was another one as well. I watched it during a period of time where I was fed up with the cute girls doing cute things genre for some reason, but after repeated insistence to see it from Attorney at War and Smoked Salmon, the series won me over with how ridiculous it all was. Perhaps that was a harbinger of things to come. After all, the Girls und Panzer director, Mitsushima Tsutomu, also directed Mayoiga. If you could have a conversation with anyone involved or remotely involved in anime, who would it be and what would that conversation be about and why? It doesn't have to be restricted to animators or directors or mangaka, but it could be producers, seiyuu, musicians, executives, CEOs, whatever. There are two that I can think of immediately. One is Kunihiko Ikuhara, the director of Maoru Penguin Drum, Revolutionary Girl Utena, and Sarazanmai. I would give anything to pick his brain about how he comes about creating the material he does, how he decides where to draw inspiration from, all the various design aesthetics he goes for, the whole 9 yards. Plus, he seems like a great blend of phenomenally intelligent and slightly crazy, which I think would give that conversation its own dynamic energy. It takes a certain kind of creativity to make something so daringly original in an industry that can get so homogenized, and asking how that creative spark operates is something I'd find so interesting. The other would be Murayama Masao, also known as the co-founder of Studio Madhouse and founder of studios MAPPA and M2. Anyone who has ever loved the content of these studios should know that Murayama was one of the main figureheads in recruiting many of the industry's most beloved figures, including Kon Satoshi of Perfect Blue and Millennium Actress fame. I'd want to spend a lot of time asking him not only about the logistics and difficulties in establishing a studio, but also his thought process behind choosing the talent that would be taken on to produce projects. He's a frequent guest at Otakon, but there's a difference between meeting someone at a panel or convention versus sitting down with them to talk at length about their life and career. Similar question, but for anime characters. If you were to have a conversation with any anime or manga characters, excluding depictions of real people, who would it be, what would you talk about, and why? Again, there are two, and for very similar reasons. They'd be Kino from Kino's Journey and Eminon from Memories of Eminon. Someone who has traveled to that many places and seen that many people must have a never-ending series of stories to tell, and their own unique perspectives and qualities would, I think, make for a wonderful time of lounging by a fireplace with hot cocoa in hand, wrapped in warm blankets, and hearing those stories unfold. And that's all she wrote, folks. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions, and thank you again to everyone for helping me get to 100 subscribers, or taking any time out of your day to come to this little corner of YouTube. Here's hoping that next year is even better, and whomever or wherever you are, I hope that life is treating you well. Happy viewing, everyone!